Hi there, and welcome to Lead Africa Study, the channel where we analyze and review books written about Africa, for Africa, by African authors, and anything in between. In this video, we will be looking at an anthology of short stories coming off the dry season, written by esteemed Zimbabwean author Charles Mungoshi and published in 1972. The structure of this discussion is that we will look at each story individually, first through a summary of the story, and then study the themes and any other pertinent issues within that story. So for now, do grab a notebook and a pen and let's get going. The first story in the anthology is titled Shadows on the Wall. This story explores the relationship between a father and his son. The story begins and ends with the narrator, who is the son, sitting silently in a hut with his father in the late afternoon. The son watches the walls as they host his father's shadow and is fascinated with the shadows rather than having any conversation with his father. In fact, his father has been trying to talk to him, trying to convince the boy to call his stepmother mother, but the boy is resistant as his own mother is still alive. Yet despite his father's insistence, the stepmother herself has left the father and has, for the fourth time, returned to her home, of which the father is planning to go back and get her again. As the sun goes down, the son begins to see his father's stubble soften, and he is reminded of the dove nestlings who he saw dead in their nest seasons ago, and who he assumed had been waiting for their mother who had gone foraging for food. These thoughts remind the son of his mother and of how the woman cared for him by ensuring his stubborn father carried him while he had a sore foot, and how his mother also made sure he was well fed. The son remembers too how the father tried to create a rift between mother and son, and too how one time, after his parents had quarreled, his mother had returned to her parents' home. But the father followed her, leaving the boy alone in a hailstorm where the boy got sick and began to watch in delirium the shadows of the hens that had escaped the cold and the wet outside to come into the warm heart. When his parents return, the son is ill, despite the father pinning the illness down to laziness. Yet even in his illness, he hears his mother's voice and feels her presence often, and not once does he see or hear his father. On the day the father returns, the parents quarrel again, and the mother leaves and is immediately replaced by a loud woman, the stepmother. The loud woman is just so much that the father becomes silent and turns to the son to try to have conversations with him. But the son does not know how to speak to a father that silenced him for so long, and therefore just stares at the shadows on the wall. Now, several themes emerge in the story. Firstly, the story explores family relationships. There is an estrangement between father and son, where there is silence between them that has been caused by an inability to communicate. The narrator acknowledges that his father has unsuccessfully tried to speak to him 5 times, and there has been no response from him because of the gap that exists between them. The shadows on the wall that the narrator watches are symbolic of the fleeting nature of their relationship and of their communication. At the end of the story, the narrator bemoans this silence between him and his father, noting that his father failed to create a relationship between the two of them when the boy was younger, and this in turn has led to a rift between them. The narrator thus notes that his father denied him the gift of language. As such, Mungoshi highlights that even though families may live together, they may become estranged, leading to a distance between them. Family relationships are also examined through the distance in the mother-son dichotomy. The narrator does not have a relationship with his stepmother, despite his father insisting that the two of them build a relationship. The narrator notes that something in me cries each time he has to call his stepmother mother. This use of a metaphor to describe his detachment from his stepmother brings to the fore issues related to how blended families may may suffer from a lack of communication amongst each other. Further, the narrator also feels a distance between himself and his biological mother as she abandoned him with his father and went back to her people, thus highlighting how distance amongst family members can lead to estrangement. Family relationships are also examined in the relationship between spouses. The narrator's father has been unable to keep a marriage afloat. His first wife left him. His current wife has run away for the fourth time, and each time the husband has had to cycle 50 miles to go and get her back. Again, this highlights a defragmentation in marriages. Lastly, Mungoshi examines family relationships through a lens of parent-children relations. This is seen when parents use their children as pawns to help in settling their marital disputes. For instance, the narrator's father attempts to alienate mother and son so that they do not have a relationship. In addition, the parent-child relationship is examined through the impact of parents engaging in fights. When the narrator's parents fight, it is the narrator who suffers, as his father has to travel to go and make amends with the mother who left, leaving the young narrator alone and sick. These familial disputes bring to light the old adage that when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. We move on now to another theme that is examined in detail in the story, and this is the theme of gender. The theme of gender is used in literature to examine how societal norms, roles, and behaviors that are associated with being a man, a woman, a boy, or a girl are explored. As such, through this theme, men and women are given gender roles according to societal expectations. Mungoshi explores this theme through analyzing gender roles. Firstly, women are expected to carry out the difficult tasks in marriage while men do the bare minimum. According to the narrator, father carries the boy on his shoulders simply because the boy has a sore foot, and only after mother has asked him to do so, since mother also carries meals for supper and firewood in her hands. The narrator notes that father would have been content to walk leisurely while mother carries the boy on her own. What this highlights is that the expectations of caring children is placed on women and not men. Secondly, gender is seen when the role of nurturing is placed on women. When the narrator was young, he saw two dove nestlings in a nest, but when he checked the nest the following day, the doves had passed. The narrator then assumes that the dove's mother passed away mid-flight on her way to bring the nestlings some food. There is no assumption on the father's role, and this highlights that women are not just nurturers, but they are also responsible for providing nourishment and feeding their offspring, thus officially making them the real providers. The nurturing role is further seen in humans when the narrator's mother stays to tend to him while he is ill, but his father, who believes the boy is being lazy, is nowhere to be seen. Thirdly, the story highlights how women are viewed as weak in patriarchal societies. The narrator, who is a young boy, falls ill, but his father ignores his mother's concerns, saying he is not sick because he is a man and you want to turn him into a woman. Weakness is therefore associated with femininity in the narrator's society. Lastly, women's voices are suppressed in the story. This is seen in father's reluctance to carry his own child simply because it was mother who instructed him to do so. This is because father did not like listening to his wife. As such, patriarchy denotes that women's voices are not supposed to be listened to. And this brings us to the end of the story, Shadows on the Horizon, and we move on to the next story, The Crow. Here is a brief summary. In The Crow, two boys decide to go on a hunting expedition, and their target is a crow that has been building its nest in the forest. Despite the fact that the boys know that it is taboo to shoot a crow because it is black and is linked to nightfall and witchcraft, the two decide to go ahead anyway. They wake up at dawn, ignore their parents' orders to follow them to the church, and go into the forest. They find the crow rising out of its nest, and daringly, even though they are both afraid, they convince each other to go after the crow. But the crow notices them and flies away. The boys are determined, however, and follow the bird as it flies from tree to tree, devising strategies on how to hit it with their catapults. Sometimes they catch a limb or a feather, but for the most part, the bird is undefeatable. Even though the narrator pretends to be as daring as Chico, he however realizes that this exercise is no longer exciting, but he carries on chasing after the bird. Eventually, they hit it and it begins to slow down, but it does not give up, continuing its fight anyway. The bird then tires and settles between the branches of a tree, yet the boys have to aim at it several times again for it to fall. When it eventually does, it is still alive, and they begin to poke and prod, even though the bird's mate tries to scare them away, unsuccessfully. But the bird is still alive, and Chico has to resort to using his hands and legs and all his energy in the fight. The stubborn bird remains alive, and at last the tired boys throw it into the river, and they throw their catapults after it before they return home. Now that we are acquainted with the story, let's get to the themes. One of the themes that is examined in the story is the theme of violence. The boys' adventure quickly turns into violence and brutality, and this is seen when they do not give up the pursuit of the crow, but instead move from using catapults to throwing pebbles to using a fork stick and to Chico using his head, hands, etc. in the fight. However, even after using violent means to reach their end goal, the boys remain unsatisfied, and this highlights how violence is not a useful tool to solve challenges. In addition, their frustration after their hunt shows that violence does not only affect the victim, but also psychologically affects the perpetrator. Another theme that is explored is the theme of coming of age. The boys go on a hunting escapade full of curiosity and wanting to experience something fun. However, the escapade quickly turns into one of brutality and immediately leaves them feeling guilty. Several times during their hunt, the narrator notes that the activity has ceased to be fun. As such, an experience that was supposed to be a fun-filled one between boys becomes brutal. There is thus a transition from innocence to adulthood expressed in the story. In addition to, the boys also develop a conscience between right and wrong because they feel guilty after their misdeeds, and this is seen when they not only throw the bird into the river, but their catapults as well. A minor theme that is also examined at the start of the story is the theme of color. The narrator notes that in their community, people are afraid of shooting the crow because it is black, and that generally black things are associated with the night and witchcraft. Everything that is black is then seen to be ominous, and this may also be seen to refer to black people. Lastly, symbolism is used to drive the story forward. The crow can be used to symbolize black people. As the story is set in colonial Africa, Mungoshi highlights the colonizers' ill intent towards browbeating black Africans and shaping them into what the colonizers wanted them to be. Yet, like the crow which refused to die, blacks rose in resistance to the whites and came together to fight until white people, with their superiority complex, had to throw their weapons away and run. So that's it again for the grow, and we move on to the next story, the mountain. In this story, two young men are crossing the mountain from their home to the bus stop in the early hours of the morning. The narrator, who is being accompanied by a friend who he does not care for, but simply tolerates, is educated, while the so-called friend, Chemai, did not go further with school. Now, as they climb the mountain to the other side, the narrator bemoans Chemai's lack of education and blames his superstitious nature on it. As they walk, Chemai continually looks behind them, scared something from the supernatural world is following them. Then in the darkness, Chemai begins to tell his companion of how the wise tried to drill the mountain for gold, but failed because of their ancestors who did not want strangers touching the gold. But the narrator disputes Chemai's claims, claiming that they were just stories and lies. But Chemai seems to sympathize with him, blaming his friend's education for his lack of knowledge about things happening in the village. Chemai tells him that his lack of knowledge stems from the fact that he has not heard anything that has happened in the mountains, including drums beating, livestock lowing, and women laughing. Again, the narrator is unbelieving and snaps at his friend, commanding him to quieten. But once Chemai quietens, the silence becomes unnerving for the narrator, and he begins to question Chemai on why the road works through the mountains were stopped, to which Chemai again gives a supernatural response, saying they are instruments filled with water. But as they walk in silence, the mountain grows eerie, and at some point the narrator feels an uncharacteristic warmth, which Chemai blames on a witch. And then in that moment, Chemai points to something behind them, a black god, and the narrator laughs. Yet even as he laughs, he remembers the superstitions surrounding the black god, which is known as a wandering and lost spirit, and which, once insulted, would begin to follow the insulter until the elders with knowledge of medicines helped the insulter get rid of the god. But the god is already following the narrator, and even as he tries to escape it by locking it into a church, the god somehow is able to keep following him, until at last the narrator decides to go to his grandmother, who refused to relocate beyond the mountain. And once he sees his grandmother and the old woman begins to brew medicine, he starts to feel safe. Now, several themes are explored in the mountain. The first theme that we'll look at is the theme of education, and this theme is highlighted in various ways. Education and the levels of education one can reach can be influenced by cultural factors such as family beliefs in education. This is seen in the differing levels of education between Chemai and the narrator. Unlike the narrator's father, Chemai's father did not believe in education and thus did not invest in sending Chemai to school. The theme of education is also seen through its impact on belief systems. For instance, the narrator believes that Chemai is not only ignorant, but is also highly superstitious, and this is as a result of his lack of education. As such, Chemai is seen as superstitious because of the things he does not know and understand. Lastly, education is seen as inculcating a superiority complex over those that are educated, especially when they interact with those they perceive as uneducated, as seen in the pompous dismissals that the narrator has over Chemai's ideas. Another theme that is explored is the theme of beliefs or superstition, particularly with regards to its relationship with Westernism. The narrator dismisses the superstitious beliefs of the people in his community as a lack of knowledge. For instance, when Chemai claims that the whites abandoned the gold mine they were drilling into, which was atop the mountain, because of the spirit of the mountain which did not want them touching the gold, the narrator dismisses this, saying there was no gold anyway. What this highlights, therefore, is the difference in beliefs amongst people, and these are mostly shaped by outside influences such as education and culture. In addition, superstition may also be used to instill culture within communities. Chemai claims to hear drums beating, women laughing, etc. up the mountain. This may have been done by the elders to instill respect towards cultural landscapes amongst younger generations. Now, closely related to this theme is the theme of colonialism as it relates to belief systems. What we see is that due to colonization and urbanization and industrialization, the colonists are always looking for ways to destroy landmarks, just as a way of ensuring that they drive their own urbanization agendas. As such, Chemai views their inability to construct a road as supernatural, and as a result of the land's refusal to yield to the colonizers.
We also see the theme of tradition through grandmother Jape, who refused to be moved from her home to an area closer to water simply because this was her home. What this highlights is that the older generations may seek to preserve culture while younger people are more adaptable, more willing to move with the times, and this may be detrimental as cultural practices may be totally eroded. Another closely related theme is that of religion, which is brought out through the literary technique of symbolism. This is seen when the narrator attempts to leave the god in the church, yet the god somehow manages to escape and follow them to Mbuya Jape's home. Mbuya Jape, however, has experience in those types of curses, and the narrator relaxes, knowing that they are in safe hands. What Mungoshi therefore highlights is the importance of using African solutions in African problems. The theme of identity is also explored in the story. This is seen when the narrator struggles with his belief system, and mainly because he is educated. At first, he refuses to listen to Chemai's logic, believing that it is because Chemai did not finish school and is therefore uneducated. Yet later, the narrator believes that the god he laughed at and which now follows him is a lost and wandering spirit. As such, he exhibits a split personality as the logic from his education and the beliefs from his background clash. Lastly, the story uses symbolism to drive its plot, and this is seen through the mountain itself. The mountain is presented by Mungoshi as the barrier between the old and the new ways, with those that climb it traveling to either side of the spectrum. For instance, grandmother Jape refuses to cross it because she will lose her history, her home, and her identity. The narrator, on the other hand, climbs it and ends up at grandmother Jape's home, back to the culture and tradition that he had forsaken. As such, the mountain represents the divide between tradition and Westernism. And again, this is the end of the story, bringing us to the next one, the hero. In this super short story, Julius is walking out of the staff room after a meeting with his headmaster and his principal, and as he walks back to his classroom, he does so defiantly. He knows everyone in the school is watching him, and this makes him feel pumped up. When he gets to his classroom, his classmates rush to hear what happened in the staff room, and Julius catches Dora's eye as Dora looks at him. At first, he tells his classmates that he has been expelled, but when they show concern, he dismisses it as a joke and attempts to feign nonchalance. However, he knows that once everyone becomes aware of what transpired in the staff room, they will all glorify him for his bravery and heroism. And even as he whistles under his breath, he does this for Dora, who he knows loves him, but he does not want to be won by her so easily. His mind wanders back to his speech in the staff room where he spoke against the poor food that they have been getting at the school despite paying school fees that covers good food. He knows it was a powerful speech, something that would have impressed the principal who nicknamed him Julius Little Caesar. But then the headmaster arrives and tells him his time is up and he has to pack. Julius hears his classmates grumble and is filled with love for Dora, whose eyes have become teary, but he goes on to pack his clothes. Once outside the school and on his way home, regret fills his heart, and he knows that his stunt of heroism has lost him the happiness that he had at school, as now he has to go and contend with his bickering stepmother. In this story, several themes are highlighted. The first theme is the theme of resistance, and this is seen when Julius refuses to survive under the injustice that exists at his school. He boldly claims to his headmaster and principal that he will not be subjected to racial discrimination, which entails eating foods they would not willingly throw away to their dogs. This resistance highlights the importance of standing up for oneself. Another theme that is highlighted is the theme of racism and oppression. Julius is racially profiled, and this racism and bullying is hidden through labeling people as dangerous. Julius is therefore referred to as a dangerous element for speaking his truth, not even for acting on it. As such, this labeling helps to justify the racist punishments that he in turn receives. Disillusionment is also highlighted as a theme. Julius, despite his hero labeling, feels devoid and empty. As he is being dismissed, he notes that his laugh is more false rather than defiant. As such, the hope that he had faded after he has been expelled, and he wallows in self-pity, even though others may perceive him as a hero. Closely tied to the theme of disillusionment is the theme of regret. Julius believes that his stunt of heroism cost him one thing that was important to him, and that is his education. He thus embodies the losses that the people who stand up to power and authority have to contend with, as they may sometimes be at the losing end, regardless of the nobility of their fight. Lastly, the theme of gender is also examined. Mothers are blamed for their children's fallibilities, while the blame is not extended to fathers. The old bat told Julius he was an unruly boy who needed a loving mother's care. Nothing is said of the father's care, and this highlights how women are seen as the sole providers of love and care in the home. And this again brings us to the end of this very short story, and we move on to the next story, The Setting Sun and the Rolling World. In this story, old Musoni is working in his dry field as the sun sets, ignoring the disturbing sound of the aeroplane when his son Namo approaches him. The old man already knows why Namo is here, as they have had the conversation for weeks without any resolution between them. Namo goes on to tell his father he has made up his mind and intends to leave their home. Yet old Musoni, even though knowing he will eventually acquiesce, asks the young man why he wants to leave, considering that the world outside is dangerous and here at home he has family and they have the land. Namo, however, is insistent and wants to pursue life outside his home. Old Musoni is scared that the changes in the world will affect his son and asks over and over if Namo has really thought about it, and Namo tells his father he is certain and that out of this land he will thrive, and he knows that even if he fails, he will always be able to come back home. In the end, old Musoni realizes he cannot hold Namo back and gives his son his blessing to go. He is heartbroken, yet he tells his son to go and get some protective medicines from the local traditional healer, and Namo agrees, even though he knows he has no use of the charms in the outside world. Musoni too knows that he will visit the traditional healer for the same portions to help appease his son's journey into the world. The story ends with the sinking sun and the coming of a chill and frost in the night. Now, several themes are explored by Mungoshi in this tale. The first theme that is explored is the theme of generational conflict, which occurs as a result of the clashes between father and son, Old Musoni and Namo. Old Musoni believes that the way of success for the people is the land and family. Namo, on the other hand, believes there is more to life than just the land, as the land is overworked and there is nothing new in it. For Namo, therefore, forging a new path away from the land is important. Generational conflict is also seen when old Musoni feels that his son is incapable of making sound decisions on his own. In a series of rhetorical questions in an interior monologue, the old man asks, "Where do you think you are going? A mere beardless kid with milk not yet dry on your baby nose." Yet despite Namo appreciating all his father has done for him, he remains frustrated by his father's refusal to let him go, as it feels patronizing and choking. Namo also expresses his anger in an interior monologue, accusing his father of sending him to school, yet wanting the young man to work on the tired, cold shell of the moon. Generational conflict is also seen in the different beliefs between father and son. Old Musoni believes that before Namo goes into the outside world, he has to go and see Chiremba the healer to get charms for strengthening. Namo agrees to go even though he knows he will bend the charms and forge his path alone. As such, because father and son belong to two different generations, their views, beliefs, needs are different, and this then leads to conflict between them. The theme of parental love and fatherhood is also explored in the story. This is seen when old Musoni feels sad as he thinks that his son will live to go into an unforgiving world, seeing as the old man has worked hard for his family. Mungoshi notes, he felt too much of a father. Old Musoni too thought that he could not be too harsh on his son and his son's decisions, and even though he did not agree with them, he felt he did not want to be too angry at the young man as it would likely bring a curse on the son. Parental love is also seen when old Musoni advises his son to visit the traditional healer. However, the older man realizes that Namo might not go, and old Musoni vows that he himself will go and appease the ancestors so that his son's path would be straightened. The silent resolve highlights how the father works hard behind the scenes to ensure his son is protected, thus highlighting the love a father can have for his child. Another theme that is explored is the theme of uncertainty. Old Musoni feels that his son is going into a world of uncertainty, which in turn will ruin him. He tells his son that the world will turn him into a homeless, nameless vagabond, as he will be too far from home. From the father's perspective, this uncertainty symbolizes loss. Uncertainty is also seen through how Musoni values his land and sees it as an identity and as a tool for survival. Because of this, he wonders how Namo will survive without land. Namo, on the other hand, sees the land as confinement. He sees his father's uncertainty as one of the reasons why his father and forefathers before him were wiped out. Lastly, uncertainty is seen in the title of the story. The title itself, together with the setting of the story, highlight both change and uncertainty. The setting sun in the title is used to symbolize the end of the father's way of life, and that is his reliance on the land. The rolling world too relates to the outside world that the son seeks. As such, both change and uncertainty are brought out in the title. Lastly, the theme of silence is also examined in the story. Both Namo and Old Musoni have a lot to say, but they choose not to speak about it. Old Musoni does not openly speak about the heartache he feels as his son leaves. Namo too has so much to say to his father, but all their thoughts end in monologues. These silences highlight how masculinity does not share thoughts, and also how this creates conflicts in families, between generations, and in relationships. And this brings us to the end of the story, The Setting Sun and the Rolling World. Before we move on to the next story, I'd like to ask you for some love, maybe a like, a comment, a share, a subscription, or all four of the above. I really would appreciate that. Now, let's move on to the next story, The Lift. In this story, two young African men are tired of going around the city in search of jobs, and they decide to while away time by getting free rides in elevators in the city's skyscrapers. But when they get to a building, a guard intercepts them, asking them where they are going. Yet, despite the boys lying and saying they were going to attend a correspondence course upstairs, they are denied entry on the basis of high levels of theft in the building. But as they leave the building, two young white men their age appear and are allowed entry into the lifts without a question. Back in the street, the young men decide to go to the park to while time away again, and the slimmer boy bemoans the shilling they used as it would probably nourish them now. The friend, however, does not tolerate the talk for long, instead ignoring his friend, leading to the other friend feeling lonely and sad. As they sit in the park, both know they would rather be somewhere than here, but they also silently accept their position in society. While the not-so-thinner one pretends to sleep and ignores his friend, the thinner one sinks into despondency as he ponders on a hopeless situation. When he tries to engage with his friend to ask why things are like this, the friend stands and goes out to sit on another bench. Again, several themes are brought out to the fore in this story. Firstly, there is unemployment, and this is seen through the boys who are now tired of going into shops and factories looking for jobs. The fact that they are tired highlights that they have been hunting for jobs for a long while. In addition, unemployment is also seen to lead to idleness. This is because the boys look forward to riding the lifts, and this helps them to forget their burning bellies and tired feet. Because of unemployment, they find joy in mundane things. Another theme is the theme of racism. This is seen through racial profiling. The guard refuses for the boys to climb the lift even after they tell him they are attending a correspondence course on the 10th floor. He tells them that there has been a lot of theft upstairs, and this can be seen as profiling black people as thieves because he does not assume that of the white boys who come in afterwards. Further, racism is also seen when two European boys who are the same age as the boys are not denied entry but are allowed to go up with no questions. Again, this highlights the social power that white people have and points to a racially motivated treatment for black people. Another key theme highlighted in the story is the impact of poverty. Poverty is seen when the boys are angry and bitter at the 1 shilling they used to buy food, and this highlights their financial lack. The impact of this lack lies in the strife that follows as the two boys quarrel with each other, leading to both feeling lonely even when they are together. The boys go on to sit in the park in an area where people are prohibited from lying in the grass, yet a couple of people are lying there. The not thin boy even says, "To hell with the rules." This again highlights how lack and unemployment may lead to wrongdoing and even crime, as people who are unemployed can become idle. Alienation is also brought out in the story. The two friends are united only by the desire to find a job and to use the lift, but other than that, they are polarized from each other. The thinner friend notes that even though they are together, they are not quite friends. Lastly, Mungoshi also explores the theme of silence and powerlessness. This is seen when the two friends deal with the conflict they are facing silently. They bear their cross without sharing it with anyone. For the thin one, their pain and struggle is internalized. Mungoshi uses the words, "he was tired," 3 times to demonstrate his internal struggles. In addition, the not thin one pretends to sleep while the thin one restlessly looks around the park. This silence highlights the passive endurance that Africans face and which makes it difficult for them to speak out. This thus brings to the fore the theme of powerlessness. The question, "Can't we do something?" from the thinner friend after they have been chased from the lift highlights the silence of Africans in the face of colonialism and oppression, and how this in turn leads to a powerlessness to fight. And this again brings us to the end of an analysis of the lift, but takes us to the next story, the 10 shillings. To begin with, here is a brief summary. Paul Masaga has been looking for a job for over 2 years, and he has been so unsuccessful to the point that he has given up and no longer takes job interviews seriously. His unemployment has, however, been brutal to him, as he has become a social outcast and a source of mockery in his community. And not only that, he has become disinterested in joining social activities. In addition, despite having lost his junior certificate which proved to employers his level of education, he is unbothered, as the JCA had become a source of mockery, with gatekeepers and security guards laughing at him, telling him there were no clerical jobs for educated people and he was better off looking for laborer jobs. And 2, he had stopped caring for his torn clothes and only attended interviews because he had been called. So when he is called for an interview at a tobacco shed, he goes there with no hope. Yet fortunately, he gets the job and he is told to start on Monday and report to a Mr. Thompson. Paul finds Mr. Thompson, a Rhodesian white farmer, working in his shed, supervising workers working on bales of cotton. Yet when Paul hands Mr. Thompson the letter of employment, the man is not only disinterested, he is also rude and gruff and undermining, and continually asks Paul questions that Paul has trouble answering. When Paul then admits that he has never worked as a tobacco grader before, Mrs. Thompson sends him away, even though Paul insists he passed the interview and that he holds a junior certificate. Yet Mr. Thompson does not care for that and chases Paul out. Back in the European interviewer's office, the interviewer is shocked to hear what transpired between Paul and Mr. Thompson, and he says there is nothing he can do to help Paul retain his job. In the end, the European interviewer gives Paul a 10-shilling note. As Paul walks out with the money, he can't help but feel euphoric from holding so much money, more money than he has held in 2 years, and he immediately forgives everyone who has done him some wrong. Now here are the themes. One of the major themes that is explored in 10 Shillings is disillusionment. This is seen when after 2 years of failing to find a job, Paul has become a cynical skeptic and has lost all hope of ever finding one. Mungoshi further uses repetition, continually saying, 2 years off, 2 years off, to further highlight the extent of disillusionment that Paul likely experiences. In addition, disillusionment is also seen when Paul describes the city as city walking, city hunger, city cruelty. This, coming from him with a rural background, highlights how the promise of the city to a rural African do not ring true once they are in the city, because the city is not as glorious as it promises. As such, the hope that people have before moving to the city is smashed and they become hopeless. Racism is another major theme explored in the story. Racism is seen through the stereotypes and labels white people put to box black people in. So this is seen when Europeans living in Africa lump all Africans into the stereotype of having an unstable emotional life. Racism is also seen through Mr. Thompson, who makes derogatory comments and who uses uncouth language when speaking to Paul. His choice of words highlights how he sees the black man as being inferior to him. Words such as bagger and bunhead, when used to describe people, indicate that Mr. Thompson does not treat the black people he works with respect. In addition, he diminishes the black mind when he tells Paul that his role is not to think, but to obey orders, thus treating the black man like a slave. As such, Mungoshi uses the theme of racism to indicate the existence of socio-economic barriers between black and white people. Unemployment is another theme that is explored in the story. Paul notes that there are many educated people at the labor exchange, and some have better qualifications than him, yet they are all looking for jobs. The impact of unemployment is also explored, and this is seen through Paul, who becomes seemingly isolated and depressed because he does not have a job. In addition, he has begun to avoid social gatherings, leading to him wallowing alone and suffering in silence. This means too that Mungoshi has been able to weave the theme of silence, which recurs throughout the anthology, into this particular short story. Lastly, the story explores the theme of poverty. Paul, because of unemployment, is unable to purchase new clothes and walks with a soleless shoe and with patched trousers. Further, poverty is seen with how people become easily snared by mockery. This is because poverty makes people feel indebted for the little they receive, even though it is a slave in the first. Paul, who has been violated contractually by having a job given to him promptly taken away even before he has started working, is given a 10-shilling note by the interviewer. Yet he does not see this as mockery because he goes on to forgive everybody for the misery in the world. Because of poverty, therefore, he does not know when his rights have been violated and when he has been oppressed. Again, this brings us to the end of the 10 shillings, and we move on to the story that is used in the title of the anthology, Coming of the Dry Season. We start again with a brief summary. When Moab Gwati receives a letter telling him his mother is ill, his first instinct is to go home and see her after he has received his salary. But once the salary comes, he spends it on a girl, Chipo, who he picked in a bar, and they spent the weekend together, he in differing states of drunkenness. When the weekend ends, he is broke and accompanies Chipo to a bus station before he starts walking aimlessly, thinking of his mother. He remembers how his mother has continually told him never to forget them, and how she has preyed on his success on finding a job. He remembers too how needy she is, and how she has always asked him, as the firstborn son, to come and stay closer to her, and how too she has asked him for help around the homestead, help which he had regretfully accepted to give. But now, broke and emotionally weary, he walks around the suburb until it is dark and everyone has retired to their houses. And when he returns to his room too, he feels as though he is in a prison cell and struggles to fall asleep. The following day he is excused from work and finds it hard to return to his home, where he will inevitably think of his mother. But when he takes a sick leave the day after, he receives a telegram telling him his mother has departed. When he goes back to his home, he finds Chipo in his bed, and he is disgusted as she immediately reminds him of his mother, especially as she too wants something from him, a marriage. He chases her away, and Chipo pays him back the money he used to pay for her bus fare back home after their night of wantonness. And alone in his room, Moab shamefully pockets this money and begins to cry, knowing his tears are not for his mother. Now, again, as in other stories, there are several major themes that are explored in the story. The first one is the parent-child relationship. The theme is brought out in several ways. Firstly, it is seen through a generational sacrifice. In Zimbabwean culture, children are expected to look after their parents when they start to work, and this is a financial, social, and emotional responsibility. This is seen when Moab's mother behoves him to remember where he came from. Secondly, the parent-child relationship is explored through the concept of black tax. Google defines black tax as the financial and social obligation of successful black professionals and other high-earning individuals to support their less affluent extended families and community members out of a sense of family responsibility and cultural values. What a mouthful. Black tax is thus presented by Mungoshi as mentally and financially taxing. This is seen when, despite having sent his mother money and goods, Moab realizes she is not satisfied. Instead, she places more demands on him, including asking him to come and work closer to her and help in fixing problems in the family. And this leaves Moab with the challenge of placing others' needs before his own. Lastly, under the parent-child relationship, we also see parental love. Moab's mother carries her son's problems as her own. This is seen because when he was not working, she was ill, likely anxious because of her son's unemployment, and she only got better after he started working. In addition, the mother also prayed and burned good luck charms for him, thus wishing him success. As such, Mungoshi uses this story to highlight the complexities in the parent-child relationship. Another major theme that is expressed in the story is the theme of silence. This is because parental expectations on children can lead to depression. Moab, for instance, remembers his mother's tears and feels guilty. This leads him to walking round and round his township at night, avoiding his own house and only going home after everyone else has gone to sleep. Even in his room, he feels insomniac. The despair is so deep-set in him that he feels he is in a prison cell with his thoughts. The silence is further seen after he learns of his mother's passing and he chases Chipo away, and only then he allows himself to cry. Yet he still does not cry for his mother, as Mungoshi notes. He cried for something that was not the death of his mother. And this highlights that he has deep pent-up issues he has never talked about with someone. Linked to the theme of silence is the theme of depression. Moab is in pain when he realizes that he is unable to give or receive love. He notes that he has lived so much with expectations from other people that he does not believe anymore in people's good intentions. He feels drained because he realizes everyone is expecting something from him, something he cannot give. He wonders this of Chipo in a rhetorical question. Why must they come back later to ask him for more of what he did not know how to give? This highlights the extent to which Moab is emotionally depleted and depressed. Overconsumption is also another theme that Mungoshi explores. Moab squanders his entire monthly salary in one weekend on women and in alcohol. The metaphor, money seemed to fly in all directions, highlights this irresponsibility. What is worse is that this hedonistic weekend of drunkenness and pleasure drives him to the point where he has no money and is also depressed. Coupled with the theme of overconsumption is the theme of regret. After Moab squanders his money, he walks blindly for kilometers on end. Regret weighs heavily on him, and this is worsened by the haunting image of his emaciated mother. Mungoshi thus highlights the dangers of overconsumption and their impact on one's mindset. Poverty is also explored in the story. After spending a weekend with Moab, Chipo is given a shilling as bus fare and an additional 2 shillings as thank you. This meager sum highlights poverty, which drives people to make reckless decisions. She even said she had never been so happy in her life after she received the 3 shillings. Likewise, Moab swallows his pride after Chipo returns with the 3 shillings and he pockets the money, seeing as he is broke. Poverty is therefore seen as a pride breaker. Lastly, the title of the story, Coming of the Dry Season, is symbolic. This is because it represents emptiness, emotional drought, and disillusionment, and this is used to explore the complexities of human relationships. And this is the end of the story, and it brings us to the penultimate story in Mungoshi's anthology, and the story is titled SOS from the Past. Here is a brief summary. Mari is waiting for the bus one day when he meets someone he used to know from home. Mari tries to avoid him, not wanting any company, but unfortunately Kasamba sees him and comes over to speak to him. The two begin speaking, with Kasamba asking questions regarding where Mari lives now and if he is allowed visitors at his home. Kasamba also shares details of his life in the city, telling Mari that even though he stays with his brother-in-law, his space is cramped and his furniture is with friends. Once they are on the bus, Mari regrets that Kasamba comes to sit next to him and begins to ask him whether he is in touch with people from home, and Mari finds himself resisting any reconnections, for he fears that people will go back home and lie to his parents about how he is doing. Once they disembark from the bus, Mari tries to shake Kasamba off, but Kasamba follows him to his workplace, asking him if there are any vacancies. Mari promises to let him know if something comes up before they agree to meet again at lunch. At lunch, Mari realizes that Kasamba is jobless and homeless, and when Kasamba asks him for a place to stay for a while, Mari agrees, albeit reluctantly. Now for the themes. The first theme that we'll look at here is the theme of colonialism. Kasamba asks Mari whether he is registered to live in the city. This can be taken to mean that black people had to have some sort of registration for them to live, otherwise they would be seen as illegals. Coupled with this theme is the theme of oppression. Kasamba says to Mari, don't fight your superiors at work. What this highlights is that in the worker-employer relationship, the employer has the upper hand and the worker is expected to do whatever is then said to keep the peace. Workers are thus not supposed to speak up, and they are forced to accept oppressive regimes. Then again, Mungoshi uses the theme of silence in the story. This is seen when Mari feels detached from the people from his home and has also become detached from his parents. He avoids any contact with the people he knows from home, and he is content with living a silent life. Mari's silence is also seen when Kasamba asks him for a place to stay. Even though Mari has tried to detach himself from his former life and is resistant to Kasamba's intrusion into his life, he still does not protest at Kasamba's request and allows Kasamba to come and stay with him, highlighting how he is silent to the things that matter to him. Gender is also explored in the story. Kasamba indicates that he wants to marry and then he will have his wife stay in his rural home to look after his house and his parents while he stays in the city. While culturally, during colonialism, this was the order of the day, the fact that Kasamba goes on to say that there is no life here in the city while he still stays there, even though he is jobless, indicates double standards on the part of men who believe that a woman's place is in the home. A minor theme that is examined in the story is the theme of greed, and this is seen through Kasamba's parents-in-law. They exemplify greed through taking their daughter, for whom Kasamba has not finished paying Roora for, and will only bring her back after the bride price has been paid. Lastly, there is the theme of community, which highlights how African cultures continually intend to build and maintain relations. This is seen in various ways. Kasamba encourages Mari to keep in touch with his friend as it is important to maintain connections. Kasamba, jobless as he is, stays with his brother-in-law. Kasamba's furniture is all over with friends, and Mari agrees for Kasamba to stay with him. Also, when people go back home from the urban areas, they find time to sit and gossip with Mari's parents. All this highlights the interconnectedness of African people together with their ability to work together and help one another. And with that last theme of community, we go to the final story in the anthology, which is titled The Accident. And first, the summary. A man is crossing the street in the city when he is hit by a car and is severely injured as he lands by the roadside. As soon as he was hit, several African people gathered by his side to ascertain the extent of his injuries. The driver of the car that hit him, a European, disembarks from his now damaged car to also come and see the extent of the damage and stands looking indifferently at the victim, while more and more Africans gather to get a glimpse of the accident. The European is clueless of what the people are saying as he does not know their language and keeps looking at the traffic lights to see if help is coming his way. As the Africans speak, there is a resolve to tell the police that the Boer purposely knocked the men down, although everyone knows that the police will not believe the Africans over the Europeans. Eventually, two policemen arrive, with the European policeman going to converse with the perpetrator and take his statement, while the African constable clears the crowd and commands the spectators to be quiet. The ambulance then arrives and the victim is placed in it, and once it leaves, the policeman asks for any witness statements. The witnesses are then told to come to the station to give their statements before the police and the perpetrator drive off. They leave the Africans wishing they had had more courage to come forward to give their statements before they all turn towards their homes in the worst. Now for the major themes. The major theme in this story is the theme of race, and it is brought out in several ways. First, there is a divide between black and white peoples, and this divide is governed by fear on the part of black people. When the perpetrator of the accident comes over to look at the victim, the bystanders note that it was difficult to read European faces. This statement might be taken to mean that black people were afraid to look at Europeans long enough to gauge their feelings. The fear is also seen when, after the accident, hordes of African bystanders tend to stare at the perpetrator and do nothing, afraid of him. This thus renders them powerless. They are content to say things like, "the bloody beasts," amongst themselves and in reference to whites, yet they are afraid of him. As such, racial relations are governed by fear on the part of black people. In addition to fear, racial relations are also governed by powerlessness. The African bystanders talk amongst themselves, yet they do not do anything about either the perpetrator or the victim. For instance, the loudest talker is appealing to the people to do something, yet he himself does nothing except talk. The powerlessness is also seen through the African constable who is left to deal with the crowd and keep them at bay, while the European policeman is involved in questioning the perpetrator. What this highlights is that even in instances blacks and whites work together, whites are always superior. Racial relations are also governed by language. The European police officer does not understand the language of the country he works in and therefore cannot communicate with his constituencies. He therefore has to rely on the African constable to interpret for him. Further, language is also seen in the names used by blacks when speaking to white people. The use of names such as Bas and Nkosi signify that there is a hierarchy in society that is denoted by color and in which white people are superior. The words Nkosi and Bas are used to mean king and boss respectively, and therefore whites are treated with reverence and respect compared to their black counterparts. Race relations are also governed by voicelessness. The black voice is dismissed as though it does not matter. When the loudest talker says he will explain everything that happened to the police, the Africans say the police won't listen. This is because of a predominantly white police force that does not take into account what black people say. Further, the Africans agree that the Europeans have gotten away with much worse before, and this is simply because they do not take the black voice into account when making decisions. Lastly, race relations also create a hierarchy amongst black people themselves. This is seen when the African bystanders call out to the police that the perpetrator hit the African man on purpose. The African constable is the one who tells them to shut up. The African constable is therefore used to silence and stifle black thought, highlighting African on African oppression that exists because of racism. Further, this indicates the existence of a culture of African silence that is perpetuated. Another theme that is explored in the story is the theme of silence. This is seen in several instances. When the European perpetrator looks like he is about to leave the accident scene, no one says a word. According to Mungoshi, they just watched him with a silence that clearly said, "You can't go away." In another instance, Mungoshi notes that after the whites left, there was a silence in the crowd, a disappointed silence. What this highlights is that they were silent when the European cop and perpetrator were around and were still silent after they left. The theme of silence thus highlights how Africans have not found their voice in fighting against oppressive tendencies. Lastly, the theme of poverty is also explored. The man who is hit by a car is poor, as seen by his holey socks and the cardboard that is used to plug a hole in his shoe. Poverty is therefore seen as something that is affecting Black Africans. And this brings us to the end of the analysis of The Coming of the Dry Season anthology, which was written by Charles Mungoshi. I do hope you find this video useful and that you found a deeper understanding of the themes in the stories. Before I leave, please let me know the books you are studying in your classes in the comments below so I can also do an analysis of those. Also, do not forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. See you in the next one. Goodbye.